5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
A very warm welcome to our session here. We're excited to have you joining us in SkillsFuture Month at SIT. I'm Sushmita, an undergraduate student from SIT, and I will be your student host for this session. The title of this Science of Learning for the Workplace. We are honored to have our speaker from NTU, Associate Professor Farhan Ali, who will be speaking to us. Mr. Farhan Ali is an assistant professor in the Learning Sciences and Assessment Academic Group, National Institute of Education, NTU. A neuroscientist by training, Mr. Farhan is interested in the science of learning, especially from the neuroscience, data science, and artificial intelligence perspectives. Without further ado, let us welcome our speaker, Mr. Farhan Ali.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned by the host, my name is Farhan, and I'm very pleased to be here today to share my perspectives on a topic that I think is highly relevant in today's environment. So, the science of learning, and in particular, how to apply it to the workplace. So, this is an overview of the talk. I will first cover what science of learning is and how neuroscience has challenged beliefs about the brain. I'll then spend the bulk of the time in highlighting aspects of science of learning that can be applied to the workplace. And finally, I'll briefly talk about NTU's latest Master of Science of Learning degree program for those who are keen to pursue this area further. So I just thought of starting with a light intro about myself. So I was born here in Singapore, did my undergraduate degree here, and in 2008, I went over to the Northeast of the United States for my PhD, followed by postdoctoral research scientist work. Pardon me for the amateurish animation. So after 12 years in the US, I then turned around just last year to return to Singapore to take up a position at NTU in the National Institute of Education. So what I wanted to highlight here is my journey that was bookended by two crises. The 2008 financial crisis, some of you um, might have gone through it when I first left Singapore, and the COVID-19 pandemic when I returned last year, which is obviously still ongoing. So I'm extremely fortunate to find a footing during my life's major transitions, despite the challenges. So this experience has shaped my view of careers and lifelong learning, and I hope those who are adversely affected by what's happening right now will stay positive. So now that I've gotten to share a bit about myself, I would like to know more about you, the participants, right? So there are too many people to ask individually. So instead, we'll do a poll. At the bottom right, you'll see a button. Try to look for the poll and click on it. Once you click on it, you'll see a list of industry. Pick the industry that best represents the company you're in. Otherwise, you can click others. So let's just take 10 seconds to do this. So again, at the bottom, there should be a button for you to press called poll, and then the options will be there for you to select. All right, so the results are coming in. For those who just join us, I'm hoping to get to know the audience a bit more. So that there is a poll at the bottom. You'll find a button. Click on the poll, and then there'll be options for you to select to tell me a bit more about the industry you're in. Select the industry that best represents your company's work. Otherwise, you can click or select others. All right, so we have a couple more votes coming in. Okay, so let me just, I believe you can see the results. So not surprisingly, we have the biggest representation being people from the education and training sector, because this is a talk about learning after all. But I'm also pleased to see a very broad representation of industries. For example, in civil service, interestingly, in manufacturing and financial services, as well as quite a number from other industries that I haven't been able to list here. So that's good. Let me just share my screen again. Okay, so I think you're back to my slides. So obviously, all of you have expertise in your own work in specific industries, and today I hope I can share some practical knowledge of how we can enhance our capabilities in learning and in acquiring new knowledge and skills, thereby helping us to perform better in our work. So let's dive in. What is the science of learning? Simply put, science of learning is an interdisciplinary approach to understand learning. Here, I'm showing you one conceptualization by leading researchers in the emerging field of science of learning. They see it as an interdisciplinary field contributed by psychology, neuroscience, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and of course, education. So why is there a need for interdisciplinary approach? The idea is that something as complex and multifactorial as learning needs to be studied from a myriad of different perspectives at different levels. So there are many hard questions about learning that we still don't have answers to. The hope is that an interdisciplinary approach might allow us to make progress instead of working in disciplinary isolation. There are also other reasons, such as persistent challenges in learning that all educational systems, including in Singapore, would face. Recently, there's been a lot of focus on developing self directed lifelong learners from childhood to adulthood. So, here I'm showing some questions, nagging questions that all educators and leaders face that we hope can be addressed from a multi and interdisciplinary perspective. For example, how can we develop self motivated learners, or how can we harness emotions for better learning? There's been tremendous growth in science of learning in the past few years. Here I'm plotting the number of publications that use the term learning. You can see over a million publications in the past few years or so. Interestingly, there's been a dip in the last couple of years. So that's for learning. And I'm now superimposing the plot for the term science of learning. So much smaller set of publications, but you can see strong growth that continues to where we are now in 2021. Globally, there's also been new journals and conferences devoted to science of learning from top universities that have pioneered new programs in combining mind, brain, teaching, and education, as shown here. So some of the universities. Now that I've given you an overview of science of learning, we'll move on to see how neuroscience research in particular has challenged um, long-held views about the brain and learning. So here I'm highlighting the neuroscience component of science of learning. So I like to use this quote by Leslie Hart, a psychologist who argued that designing educational experiences without an understanding of the brain is like designing a glove without an understanding of the human hand. So I think this quote captures quite succinctly the importance of neuroscience knowledge in education. So while teachers, trainers, and educators are, of course, not expected to be experts in the brain, some knowledge can be useful. In a forthcoming book chapter that I've written, I highlight three areas where neuroscience has made contributions relevant for education. First, in the area of debunking um, or dispelling neuromyths. So these are myths about the brain. Second, in designing learning experiences. And third, in remediating learning difficulties. So let's focus on neuromyths for now. So neuromyths obviously is made up of the terms neuro and myths. These are beliefs about the brain and mind that do not have a good scientific basis. They are based on folklore, rumors, misunderstanding, and misinterpretation. So Hollywood is one good purveyor of neuromyths. For example, some of you may have watched the movie Lucy. where you have this character played by Scarlett Johansson, who takes a drug and can start using more than uh, 10% of her brain, allegedly, becoming a genius who can learn new languages in seconds, or even do mind reading. So is it true that we only use 10% of our brain? Research strongly suggests that this is false. We don't use just 2% or 10% of our brain. Here, I'm showing you one fMRI image of native speakers of Mandarin. So these are uh, individuals who were born speaking Mandarin, raised in a Mandarin-speaking environment. Uh, Here's a left side. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse moving, but on the left, you see the left side of the brain, and on the right side of the brain. And the hot colors here, meaning colors in red, represent brain areas that are active in writing Mandarin characters compared to when the person is at rest. So you see huge chunks of the brain, more than 50%, lighting up, becoming active for something as simple as writing a well-learned character. So fMRI is, of course, something many of you might have heard of. It measures brain oxygen level. So if a part of the brain is active, it needs more oxygen to power the activity. So you see a lot more oxygen being used in that part of the brain that's active. So in general, the brain is a very expensive organ to maintain. Despite being very small, it consumes a tremendous amount of energy, even at rest or during sleep. And that's because the brain is constantly working. So don't believe the myth that we are using only 10% of our brain. The research suggests that that is not true. So another neuro myth is the very popular left brain versus right brain. You see books based on this belief. The story is that the left brain is more logical, right, and factual. So it deals with math and science and so on. And the right brain is more emotional and creative. So many times this idea is promoted by people trying to sell products such as books and enrichment activities. For example, here. Uh, but what does the research say? Again, here the research is quite clear. For example, emotions are not localized or not uh, processed just in the right hemisphere. This is a picture from Weger et al. Of the areas of the brain that are important for positive emotions, shown in green. So the green circles represent areas that are active when you experience positive emotions, and the red circles represent areas of the brain that are active when you experience negative emotions. So you can see that the points are scattered all over the left and the right brain, not necessarily in one part of the brain. How about mathematics? So is mathematics localized to the left brain? So again, the brain imaging suggests that math computations or arithmetic involve both left and the right hemisphere. This is a top view of the brain. So instead of looking from the side, imagine you're looking from above and the brain is below. Um, this will be the left hemisphere on the left and the right hemisphere. These are different pictures of different views of the brain from the top. And you can see colors representing activity patterns active in both left and the right hemisphere. So it's not just specialized in one hemisphere. Now you may be wondering, hey, Dr. Farhan, don't these pictures show that we only use 10% of our brain? Very small areas are lighting up, so to speak. Not quite, because the image here is comparing computing, as shown here, compute versus reading. So only areas that are specialized for computing, in this case, mathematical computing, would light up, so to speak. In actuality, if you show all the areas involved in computing compared to rest when you're not doing anything, a lot more areas of the brain are involved. However, most research papers don't show those images. They show images comparing one active condition, in this case computing, against another active condition, which is in this case reading. So in that case, a lot smaller number of brain areas are involved. So due to time constraints, I wasn't able to elaborate much. You're welcome to email me for a copy of the book chapter for more details. Um, so why is neuro literacy or literacy about the brain so important? I think it's important to be literate so that we can be skeptical of proclamations about the brain, especially from people with a vested interest to sell products, right? So ultimately, teachers, educators, and trainers need to exercise their critical thinking in applying beliefs about the brain in teaching and learning. All right, so I would like to spend the rest of the time showing you how science of learning can be used to provide a better understanding of, uh, of learning in the workplace. So when I was thinking about how to present, I wanted to show the scientific findings related to learning and performance in the workplace, but I wanted to do it in an engaging manner. Right? I did not want to just present a laundry list of scientific findings. So in addition to making you more curious, I also hope to provide some concrete suggestions for self-development and self-learning. So I came up with this idea of going through the day of a typical Singaporean workday, highlighting relevant aspects of work that science of learning can illuminate. So I apologize to those who don't work the typical office hours, but I hope you can still learn a few things from the talk that takes this structure of a workday. All right, so the clock will be sort of an anchor for us. Let's get the clock moving. Most of us would wake up early in the morning, right? 7 a.m., maybe earlier for some of us with children. So I'll have more to say about this aspect of sleep and wakefulness later on. But let's just say you wake up sleepy and make the journey to the office. Nowadays, you are able to just put on a new shirt and maybe go straight to the computer. But traditionally, this is what you would do, right? And by the time you reach the office, many of us would be tired, if not sleepy, right, at 9 a.m. And what do? Most of us would try to perk ourselves up, right? We would try to get some beverages such as coffee or tea to keep us awake. So the main ingredient for this, as some of you would already know, is caffeine. So caffeine um, not only increases our wakefulness, as many of you would know, but it also seems to increase attention and focus. Many people I know cannot work without taking coffee in the morning, right? So why and how does caffeine work? So previous explanations have been quite vague. For example, coffee stimulates one's brains, but how does it do it? What are the or neuroscientific basis for it? There's something that modern research has uncovered in a somewhat surprising manner. So it may be surprising to you to know that caffeine actually reduces blood oxygen levels. So it's as if you're starving your brain of oxygen. This is a picture of the left brain hemisphere on the left. In the middle will be the top view of the brain, and on the right will be the right view of the brain. So colors here represent blood oxygen levels. Colder colors, such as blue, show reductions in oxygen. So this picture shows you what happens to a person's brain when he or she takes caffeine, in this case, coffee. So you can see widespread reductions. Most of the brain has turned blue, meaning it's getting less and less oxygen. So again, it's as if when you take caffeine, you are depriving your brain of oxygen, which is not what you would expect for us to feel sharp and focused, right? Usually, when an organ loses oxygen, such as a muscle, you should feel more tired. So it turns out that caffeine, while reducing blood oxygen, as I showed you earlier, increases what's called brain entropy. For some of us who are engineers, you may have heard of this term. So entropy is a measure of how random or unpredictable your brain is at one time point compared to other time points. So here I'm showing you the same set of brain pictures, but this time we are coloring it with not with oxygen, but entropy after taking caffeine. So you can see a completely different picture. There are a lot more hotter colors, right? A lot more reddish colors that indicate increases in brain entropy. So increase in randomness of your brain. So based on other pieces of research that I'm not showing here, it's now known that brain entropy or randomness is linked to attention, creativity, and even intelligence. So Just to summarize, what I think might come as a surprise, when you stimulate your brain in the morning with stimulants such as coffee, you might not actually be making your brain more active. In fact, might be depriving it of oxygen, making it less active. Instead, what coffee is doing is that it's making brain activity patterns much more random. This might then relate to your ability to think more divergently, to think more creatively, and not get mentally stuck in the morning. Just thought of sharing something fun that I discovered recently. This is a cheat sheet if you want to order coffee or kopi in the local lingo, right? Um, there's, of course, kopi O and there's kopi Kao, which I've heard about, but there's also others that I've also learned, such as kopi Po and kopi Dilo. I never knew there were so many different ways to order and drink coffee. So I know some of us may not like coffee. I don't personally, but there are other alternatives with caffeine, such as tea, diet soda, and interestingly, meditation also potentially increases randomness in your brain activity patterns. So I'm not here to promote any particular beverage or activity, but if you're looking for ways to get your brain more random, potentially more creative in the morning, so that you get more focused and creative, these are some of the things to look out for. All right. So after uh, a few hours in the office, we move the clock. You then engage in all sorts of multitasking, right? You read and answer emails. You peruse reports, even more emails, and then of course there's distractions of social media, such as Facebook, Twitter, and so on. Now, one question we can ask is whether we are good at multitasking, right? Um, However, research suggests that humans are generally quite poor at multitasking. When we perform multiple tasks, we are really just switching from one task to another rapidly. So we have to do this because we are really limited by the capacity of the brain for attention and memory. For example, it's hard to read an email and listen to a Zoom meeting very well at the exact same time, although we might be getting better at it given the situation we are all in right now. But in general, it's not easy to do it. So one piece of recent research found that people who like to multitask in life have more attentional lapses, and this leads to more forgetting. So here I'm showing you a plot of accuracy of recall in the y-axis. So y-axis is this vertical line. Um it's a measure of how well you recall, and the x-axis is a measure of how much multitasking the individual likes to do in life. So that's using a questionnaire. So you see this negative relationship as an individual tends to multitask more, they tend to suffer more and more from forgetfulness, and their memory recall is poorer. On the right, I'm showing you brainwaves called posterior alpha, measured by a device called EEG. Uh, EEG standing for electroencephalography. So think of this as the Fitbit with sensors on the brain. So you put it on your head and it's measuring brain activity levels. So these are brain waves in the back part of the brain. So these waves seem to be responsible as the higher you multitask, the more alpha waves there are. And that, as I mentioned earlier on the left, the more you multitask, the more forgetful you can get. So these are potentially the brain waves involved in forgetfulness. Now, this is where it gets surprising, right? This is recent research suggesting that if you are given a task, but you perceive it, meaning you interpret it and engage in it as a multitask, so you tell yourself that these are really multiple tasks that you have to do, this perception will lead to a better performance compared to those who consider it to be one task. So to be concrete, let me give you an example. So the researchers gave participants a crossword puzzle. So that's very familiar to us. Shown here, it's supposed to find words in that crossword puzzle. Um, but there's also an anagram task in which we are given a series of letters and then we're supposed to form as many words as possible. So they're supposed to do this crossword task as well as the anagram task at the same time. And those who considered these two tasks to be very different to be different tasks, they surprisingly did better in each of the tasks than those who simply considered these two tasks as a single task about words, about finding words. So what explains this result? The researchers also tracked the eyes of participants using cameras. So the black part of your eye, again, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. The black part of the eye in the right in the middle is your pupil. It reflects your arousal or activity level. The larger it is, the more aroused and focused you are. When you're highly active and focused, your pupil gets larger. And this is what we see for individuals who perceive the two-word tasks that I gave you earlier, the crossword task and the anagram task, as different tasks. Their pupils are just larger. They seem to be a lot more focused and active, as shown in red, compared to the single taskers, the ones who interpreted the word task to be just a single task. Their pupil sizes are a lot smaller, as shown in blue. Now, so what's the lesson here? The lesson from science of multitasking as you're working is that there are, I think there are bad kinds of multitasking, but there are also good kinds of multitasking. So the bad kinds of multitasking, they happen when you engage with very different media with completely different goals. For example, you're watching YouTube videos for distraction, checking your WhatsApp messages for communication with family, reading work emails, etc. I'll be the first to admit that I sometimes fall into this category. So all of these have activities have very different goals and might make you more prone to forget and perform worse. But there are also good kinds of multitasking in which you have a single goal. Say you want to understand a complex report, as shown here in the middle. But if you break it down into smaller tasks using different technologies, and you interpret this as different activities that you need to do simultaneously, it might be that your arousal and activity levels can go up. So you're actively reading your email with instructions on what the report is, but you're also Googling certain terms that in the report that you're not clear about. You're also using various software to make notes about the report. You're going back and forth in this manner. So I do this a lot. I have a single task, but I break it down into multiple subtasks, and I rapidly switch and sort of go into this rhythm where I'm sort of really engaged and focused in the different tasks to achieve a single goal. So in essence, you are turning a single task into a multitask that keeps you busy and active. And this is something, again, I do a lot. So reframing a single task into numerous components that serve a single goal, I think has scientific basis in enhancing your activity levels and your focus. All right, so again, let's move on now to lunch. And after lunch, for some of us, tea and coffee. And what's fun about it, I guess, is the socializing part, right? We get to see our colleagues, relax, chat a little, and interact over food and so on. Now, this is where we turn to the science of social emotional learning. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of the importance of social emotional skills for the workplace. For example, EQ, right? Emotional intelligence, quotient. So social emotional skills have many components. Today, I'm going to focus on emotions. And this is where my research lies. So the importance of emotions for learning, particularly what I've called emotion granularity, um has been sort of become an emerging topic in the field. I would like to strongly recommend the work of neuroscientist and psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's been a pioneer in this area. If there's one book about the brain that you should read, this is the book. How Emotions Are Made is very engaging and introduces the brain in a very engaging and scientific manner, yet scientific manner. So what is emotion granularity? So what is emoji? So here's an example. So we have a person here who likes to use the term disgust or disgusting, right, for everything. I think this applies to quite a number of Singaporeans because we use that term a lot. So the person would say something like, I am disgusted that racist comment is disgusting, my boss is disgusting. Um, so again, I think we have tendency to use this word for everything. This is an individual with low emotion granularity. Everything is just disgusting, right? So an individual with high emotion granularity uses more precise and accurate terms to convey their feelings. For example, I am annoyed. That racist comment is appalling, or my boss is obnoxious. So those were for negative emotions. The same can be said for positive emotions. This person has low emotion granularity. She feels everything as being happy. No, I'm happy. My work makes me happy. My boss creates a happy environment. But for this other individual with high emotion granularity, as shown on the right, she uses more variable terms such as I am excited, or my work inspires me, or my boss creates um, a pleasant work environment instead of just saying happy. Now, what's amazing is that research has shown that by having high emotion granularity, you're less likely to get sick. You're less likely to get depressed. You're less likely to be alcoholic. You're less aggressive. And if you have high emotion granularity, high emoji, you're also able to increase your social functioning, meaning you know what to do in social situations. You can better self regulate your emotions, better able to overcome your fears. You're more resilient. So that's amazing just by being better able to use more precise emotions to describe your feelings, right? So why does the use of more precise emotion label help us? The idea is that it allows us and our brain to interpret events and experiences more finely. Now imagine if you label everything as disgusting, then our body reacts negatively in the same manner. But this is not potentially appropriate, right? So, for example, it might waste precious energy if you consider something as disgusting when in fact it's merely annoying. So there's a big difference between the two. So many times when you hear about EQ, it may be vague advice about controlling your emotions. However, here the advice is very concrete. The advice is to socialize and learn new emotions. For example, learn the difference between despondent and disappointed, between nervous and anxious, between sympathy and empathy. Even better, go beyond English and learn words in other languages to learn the nuances of emotions in other cultures. So I've learned that there are words for karma in other languages, in Malay as well as in the local language, Singlish language, right? Kiasu. These are words that can finally categorize what you feel, and your brain and body will make the appropriate responses, and you'll be much better adjusted. All right. So again, let's move on to the rest of the day. There are, of course, many more hours in the workday, but due to limited time, I'm not able to go through some of the scientific findings. I just want to highlight a few issues. So, for example, toward the end of the day, we may fall into the trap of idling our time away, and this is how the science of curiosity can help you find meaning in your work. And I do have an article, a research article under review that looks at the importance of curiosity in adult learning. And then once we reach home, we are not immune to work, right? And this is where the science of stress can help us cope. If you would like to find out more about the latest findings um, in these areas about curiosity, about stress, and so on, do consider our latest NTU Master of Science, Science of Learning degree program. I'll talk more about this at the end. But I thought I'll pivot and move quickly to highlight one controllable aspect of learning and performance at work. And this is having good and adequate sleep. I think, given the workload and stress of work, family, and so on, many of us can't find enough time to have a good night's sleep during the weekday, especially, right? However, the research is very clear. There are strong positive relationships between sleep quantity and quality. On the one hand, and work performance and learning on the other. So here's a meta-analysis. in which researchers combine results from many studies, not just one study, to examine this issue. So they found that more sleep is linked to more positive feelings, better job attitudes, more cognitive resources, for example, motivation and so on. All of these have positive effects on task performance and various measures of work behavior. It's okay if you don't understand this figure. The point I want to make is that even Jeff Bezos, who's the multi-billionaire, I believe he's already a centi-billionaire, meaning he has like more than $100 billion in his bank account or something. He agrees. Here's a man who earns millions of dollars an hour, but he still emphasizes getting 8 hours of sleep so that he can perform optimally during the day. Now, what does the science say about the lack of sleep? So here are pictures of the brain from individuals with normal sleep. These are areas of the brain that are on the left and on the right that are highly active. In red, active and connected. So here it shows you the areas of the brain that are connected to one another in red. After a single night of sleep restriction, as shown in the bottom, the brain becomes less connected, as shown by the lack of hot or red colors. So a single night of sleep restriction makes your brain less connected. So that's a single night of sleep restriction. What about chronic sleep deprivation? Let's say you cannot sleep well for days and weeks. This is a plot of the different parts of the brain in a circle. So instead of showing you the brain on the diameter of the circle, on the outer limit, you have the different parts of the brain shown, and the lines represent the links between the different parts of the brain. So you see a lot of lines for individuals who have been resting at night very well. And then on the right, you have individuals who are sleep restricted for days and on end, and you see a lot less links. So again, connection patterns or brain connections become less prominent in individuals who suffer from chronic sleep deprivation. It's also important to note that sleep plays an important role in memory consolidation. As you know, when we learn something new, right, not everything is remembered long term. Only memories that are consolidated will get remembered for weeks and months. So in this experiment, individuals learned something new. They were then tested a few hours later. So one group had normal sleep, as shown in the dark bar, and they could recall a certain amount of information that they learned previously. However, the individuals who were sleep deprived and then tested later on performed over 40% worse in their memory, as shown in the light bar. So we now know, based on numerous research, why sleep is important. When you learn something new, when you're awake, it involves different parts of the brain. For example, an area called the cortex or cortical region, as well as the hippocampus. When you sleep, there's activity, even when you're sleeping, in those brain regions. This activity during sleep helps strengthen the memory in the cortical region part of the brain. When you then wake up the following day, your cortical brain region can now remember better without needing any help from other brain regions. So when you are sleep deprived, this process of consolidation during sleep is severely disrupted, and what you've learned will very likely be forgotten, and you are not able to consolidate the information. So the lesson here is from Science of Learning, Sleep and Performance, is that good quantity and quality of sleep is important for workplace performance. A lack of sleep has strong effects on brain connections. So what you've just listened to is a taste of the scientific findings about learning and specific applications to the domain of workplace performance, because I believe this will be more broadly useful for the audience today. Not everyone here is a teacher, but I thought it'd be useful if we frame it as applications to workplace learning and performance. So if you would like to learn more for personal reasons or for professional reasons, such as your work in training, learning, and education, I would highly recommend our Master of Science, Science of Learning program. So it's a unique interdisciplinary program. covering neuroscience, biology, psychology, artificial intelligence, technology, and education. It's unique because it's a partnership with the LKC School of Medicine. So you get experience with multiple faculty and campuses in the degree program. Here's the QR code as well as the program website. If you're interested, you can apply to the master's degree program. However, the deadline to apply for the full master's degree program just passed a few weeks ago. There is another route you can take. If you're not ready to commit to a full master's degree program, you can consider taking individual courses on their own and then stacking the credits over a few years to get subsequent credentials, such as the mini master, which is awarded after 15 academic units, which is roughly 4 courses. You can also further stack these courses to obtain a master's degree. So to take this lifelong learning route, you can check NTU's website as shown here. And in December, our courses will be available for enrollment via this lifelong learning route where you obtain credits to stack for future qualifications. So just to summarize the key takeaways, science of learning is an interdisciplinary approach to understanding learning. Neuroscience has debunked some of the common myths about the brain, and I've provided some concrete applications of science of learning to the workplace. As you think about your workday, these are some of the areas that can help with your work: multitasking, emotion granularity or emoji, the role of sleep in enhancing well-being and performance. These are references in case anyone is interested in looking up for more information. And at this point, I'm happy to take questions. So if you look at the bottom, there is a button, live Q&A. You are able to post questions, and I'll try my best to answer them. So take a moment to think of questions you may have, and feel free to post them. All right, we do have some questions already in, and I'm going to address these questions. In the meantime, feel free to post more questions. So there's a question by Corinne Ong, and the person is asking, what if you take long afternoon naps, say 2 hours, and then sleep through less than 6 hours at night? Does it add up to 8 hours of sleep in a day, presumably? Okay, great question, Corinne. Yes. Mathematically, yes, they do add up to 8 hours. 2 plus 6 would give you 8. But physiologically, they don't add up to the same benefit as an 8-hour sleep at night. And the reason I say that is that when you sleep at night for hours on end, the body and the brain in particular undergoes certain cycles. And these cycles can take hours to complete. And in a nap, they don't happen. And many of these cycles are important for memory and subsequent body and brain health. So even though arithmetically you are sort of adding up to the same number of hours, physiologically your brain is not benefiting fully because there are certain things that happen during sleep at night, what's called nocturnal sleep, that don't happen during naps. So it's really important that we don't accumulate this debt. So some people may also ask, oh, what if I sleep 4 hours during the weekday and then sleep 16 hours during the weekend, right? Can we pay the debt? So again, it doesn't fully repay it. It's been looked at in the literature. You cannot really pay the debt, your sleep debt, by napping more or sleeping more during the weekend. It is just naturally not how it works at night. Yeah, if you don't get the same number of sleep hours. Yeah, it's a good question though. Yeah. Okay, so there's a question by Anonymous. Will the number of brain connections recover after getting enough sleep, after chronic sleep deprivation? Good question. Yes, there is evidence suggesting that the brain is plastic, meaning it's still quite flexible. Even when you're an adult, there's still a lot of change that's going on in the brain. So you can recover somewhat, some of the lost benefits you may have had by sleep deprivation by sleeping more later on. However, there are long-term consequences of just chronic sleep deprivation. If you've been doing it for years, there might be some disadvantages that you cannot really overcome. So I would strongly recommend having a consistent sleep pattern. If you read the literature, read books, and talk to coaches and so on, they will tell you sleep routines are important. They help your body recover, and it helps you with your brain, mental, and physical health. So I would say um, it is possible to recover some bad habits previously by you know changing your habits, but if you start early from young and then you maintain it consistently, you're more likely to gain the benefits. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we'll move on to other topics. There's been quite a number of questions about sleep. All right. About how about emotion? So for emoji, there's a question by anonymous. For emoji, what if someone is high in emoji but lack vocabulary? Does it mean he is low? So the literature suggests that um, if you just experience something and you don't give it a label, meaning you don't appraise it in scientific parlance, it's called effective labeling. You don't label your emotion and so on. You don't necessarily experience the emotion because emotion is sort of something that is not just physiological, not just something you feel, but also something you appraise and label, and that becomes part of your experience. So um, in the literature, it suggests that language plays a very important role. If you're able to experience and label it using a word, doesn't matter what language, it doesn't matter what word it is. If you're able to encapsulate it in a term and then use that to interpret the emotion, that's much better, and it can have benefits for you both, mentally as well as physically. Yeah. By the way, emoji emotion granularity is not necessarily related to IQ or language use. There are native speakers of English. So a lot of research has been done in Western samples, right? They are native speakers of English. They speak English, but their emotion granularity is just low. They basically don't have enough exposure to emotion episodes and labels, and they end up using a very limited set of labels and language and words to describe their emotions. So, as I mentioned earlier, Singaporeans do tend to have, average to above average command of English, right? But we do fall into this trap of labeling everything as disgusting, and not trying to finely distinguish different situations. Yeah. All right. Let's maybe address another question on emotion. Um, Is there a way to motivate my child to increase his emotion granularity? Excellent question. Yeah. So the book, How Emotions Are Made, goes into greater detail as to how we can develop emotion granularity. The biggest advice is really exposing the child to emotion experiences. And second, giving them opportunities to label using various words. So when I say exposing them to various emotion episodes, it doesn't necessarily mean that you put them in a situation where they feel anxious or they feel shame and all that. It could just be as simple as watching a movie, reading a story, describing the emotions of this particular protagonist or character, and then giving them labels and so on. So those are things that I think help. I have a 6-year-old daughter who attends student care, and she came back one day telling me that uh, the teacher taught her that stress equals something like um, anxiety plus worry, and I was blown away. The student care center emphasizes a lot on emotion regulation, and one of the topics they like to get into is how to identify emotions and explain them. And then they go through this program where they teach them sort of the arithmetic of emotions. What are some of the elements that make up certain complex emotions? And then you can break down the elements and recognize them. So I think that's an excellent way to do it. Giving them sort of basic tools to break down emotions and then add them up. Um, Mixed emotions is another thing. A lot of the emotions we feel are not single emotions, so we don't just feel anger or fear. We may feel a mix of disappointment, anger, annoyance, and so on. So there's something you can also promote in your children. Emotions are not as simple as just one emotion. Yeah, you can also encourage them to think of emotions as being complex, made up of multiple different emotions all rolled into one. Yep. So maybe I can address one last question or the last set of questions on the Master of Science of Learning. So the first cohort will be in January 2022. The application window just closed, and we are reviewing the applicants. And it's a very big cohort of over 20. We're hoping a very big cohort, but we still have places for anyone who's interested in, again, the lifelong learning route, where you take individual courses first without committing to a master's program, a full master's degree program, and then you accumulate these credits, and eventually these credits can be used later on if you want to get a formal master's degree. Yeah. So that's something you can consider sometime in December when these courses are open for enrollment. I'm not sure how much more time we have. I'm also mindful that people have to move on. Sushi, do we have time for maybe one? So maybe one last question. Can you give the name of the book by the doctor? So I believe you're talking about the secret life of the brain. So how emotions are made. If you just Google how emotions are made, the first hit will be the book by Lisa Feldman Barrett. Yeah, she's a Canadian neuroscientist who's one of the top neuroscientists in this area. Yeah. So how emotions are made. Um, just Google it. Yep. All right. So I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to the host, and I want to thank all the participants. We have a pretty large crowd today that joined, and a lot of questions are very engaging, and it shows a good level of understanding. And I'm hoping to get more opportunities. If you're interested in the field and would like to go further, I would strongly recommend visiting our program website. So just Google Master of Science of Learning, NTU, and then you'll be able to hit the program website. Thank you so much. Over to you, Sushi.
Thank you, Mr. Farhan Ali, for the great sharing and insights. We have come to the end of this session. Thank you all for attending. We would love to hear some of your feedbacks. You will be provided with a survey right after this session, and do give us your valuable feedbacks. Thank you once again for joining us, and continue to enjoy the rest of the sessions today.
Bye.